Okay, so last interview of the 2026 North American Bee Expo with Dr. David Peck.
How's it going?
And Betterbee, which I've recommended to my viewers at least twice.
Probably once or twice, yeah.
So now the inventory probably has moved out of here pretty good.
Yeah, this is a much sparser booth than it was when we started this process. That's certainly the case.
What are the hot sellers this year?
Well, I mean, you're standing right where we had an automatic uncapping line, which for a beekeeper of a certain scale, so not the full mini line, which we featured here last year, but the line that we actually use at Betterbee ourselves. So it's a licensed automatic uncapper with an extruder that compresses the wax underneath. It feeds into this sump, which is then going to do some filtration of the honey as it flows through, pulls out the wax. These are the two extractors that we literally use ourselves, not these two, these are clean, but we use a 30 and a 20, or maybe a 30 and a 30. They both feed into that same sump, and so I can be loading one while the other one's running, and unloading it, swapping around, and then the other one is dumping in while the other one runs. All of that gets pumped off into our holding tanks, and that's how we do our own honey harvest. So it was really cool to show off the way we harvest our own honey for folks who might be running another, we have 250 production hives and then another 400 nukes, and we pull some honey off the nukes too. So if you're at that scale, this is a real nice way to pull honey.
How was last year for honey yields for you?
Good. We were in we had a sort of weird weather in the spring and sort of weird in the fall, but despite that, we actually did not as well as we have in the past, but definitely not nearly as bad as folks a little bit to the west and a little bit to the east. We got lucky. The upper Hudson Valley is a pretty gentle spot to keep bees.
I'm going to jump forward.
Sounds good.
Your new oxalic acid.
The Api-Bioxal RTU.
Yes,
yeah.
RTU, ready to use.
Yes.
Let's talk about that if we could.
I'm incredibly excited about it.
Let's go.
Okay. Let's head on over here. Should I do a college tour where I walk backwards? Oh, I guess that's why they don't do it all the time.
Okay.
All right, here's where we want to be though. So, this is a product. It's Api-Bioxal RTU, ready to use. And what's cool about this is that this is a pre-mixed oxalic acid dribble. So instead of doing any math and having to mix something up in the kitchen and then getting yelled at because you use the scale and you got oxalic acid on it, now you've, etched the counter or something like that. It's just, you take the bottle, you pour it into your doser, something like this, or you can use any kind of syringe or whatever you want, but you put it into this bottle, you squeeze up 50 milliliters of it, and then you just let gravity dribble that right in between the frames of your colony to treat your bees. It is a higher dose of oxalic acid than in the OA sugar syrup dribble that you're allowed to mix up and that folks have been able to do for years. It's also it contains no sugar, which means that it's shelf stable, no HMF forms in it. Fred, what's HMF stand for?
I'm not going to pronounce. I just call it HMF.
Right, that's why everybody does.
Yeah,
so you're not going to get fructose turning into hydroxymethylfurfural instead, which is toxic to bees.
That right there is why I did not try to pronounce it. Okay.
So instead of that, it's just going to be oxalic acid. You've got glycerin in here. You've got water in here. There's nothing in here that's going to make make those toxic byproducts form, which means that this is shelf stable at room temperature, opened on your shelf for a year or something in that ballpark.
Okay.
So it's a really handy thing for beekeepers to use. Even if with a few hives, you can treat a few and then come back later and use it again. Okay. Because there's no sugar in it, the bees also don't want to eat it. And so it's never seemed very sensible to have a contact miticide put into the hive in a thing that I know that colony is perfectly primed to go in and devour and store away. And so the fact that they aren't tempted to eat the stuff means that it winds up circulating in the hive on the bees, on the mites longer, and you wind up killing more mites. So it's a really exciting way for a beekeeper to use oxalic without having to get a $500 vaporizer and a mask and run the risk of eye damage, lung damage. Exactly. Yeah. So if I'm going to work with oxalic acid, I'm very excited to be doing it this way at a higher dose and actually pretty affordable.
What is that higher dose?
It's 6.2% active ingredient, and the maximum in the homemade sugar syrup I think is like 3 point something or 4 point something.
It's a big jump.
So yeah, it just got approved at a higher dose, which is more effective. But I think the real value of the thing is, to me at least, that I don't have to do any math. I don't have to think about it. It's 5 milliliters per seam of bees. There's no maximum dose per hive, so it's not like 50 milliliters is the cap like it is with the powder mixed with the sugar syrup. It's just if you got a nuke, 5 milliliters per seam of bees. If you've got a 4-story colony, 5 milliliters per seam of bees.
So when we're saying seam of bees,
yeah, it's
that's
the
populated
occupied
seam
space
between. Okay.
in between 2 frames, exactly.
Okay, and how long have you been using this?
So I've been doing some testing on this. Cameron Jack at the University of Florida.
Which, by the way, let's plug the video that you did with Cameron Jack.
That's true. I did a video with Cameron. Yep.
Okay.
So Cameron at the University of Florida and his master's student Marie Yanchek did work on this, and then we also recapitulated that work in the Betterbee apiary. And so both of those data sets are now in Marie's hands, and we're going to work through publishing that. But I actually had the privilege, before I came up here, of being down at the American Bee Research Conference that co-met with ABF down in Mobile. Okay. So I was down there for the last couple of days, and Marie was the very first scientific presentation talking about her work on RTU and how it, even when you've got brood, the repeated applications, which it explicitly allows on the label, performed as well as Api-Var treatment. It performed as well as repeated OA vapes at high dose, like Cameron has been doing. And so, you know, it really demonstrates that this is entering into the realm of treatments like those we already have, and probably has a couple of legs up on certainly like a winter sugar syrup dribble. This is gonna have a few advantages over that I think are pretty compelling.
Okay. So the other thing is, often we get the question about temperature parameters, especially with dribble.
Oh yeah.
What kind of limitations are there with this?
So on the label, as far as, no, don't get me committing any crimes here.
We always
so
want
I am
people
gonna
to read
I
the
am
label.
gonna
Yep.
double check the label, because that's the way it works. The label is the law.
Yep.
To my knowledge, there are no temperature restrictions on this. But if that's not true, that's just a fun Easter egg for your viewers to go in and call us on in the comments. But I believe that there is absolutely no temperature restriction listed on this label. The best practice would be generally that you can go at, you know, as long as the colony's alive in heat, they're going to be able to handle this. There's not any work that they have to do. There's no vapors or fumes that they have to worry about in high temperatures. At low temperatures, the biggest problem is actually not going to be any harm to the bees. Even adding that moisture to the cluster in winter, generally they can cope with a small amount of it. The biggest trouble is actually that the cluster can get so tight that you're only going to hit the outer shell of bees, and it'll all just sort of run off the outside and won't be able to get circulated throughout the colony. So generally you look for a day with you look for a day with a warmer, you know, winter day, so that you've got a slightly looser cluster, ideally as warm as possible. If you've got a polystyrene hive or other kind of insulation that'll keep them moving a little bit more. If they're a little bit more spread out, it can be nice to you know, hit more of the bees with that one dose.
Okay. What else do we have to talk about? What was let's talk about cages.
Oh, okay.
What is the most popular queen isolation or introduction cage that you're selling right now? What are the people asking for the most?
So right now, probably the thing, we can head over here, the thing that we're probably selling the most of, and what we appear to have sold out of here, are the single frame deep queen, frame isolation cages. So that is queen excluder spacing that keeps the queen inside, but is going to allow workers to come and go through it. So the single deep is going to hold just a single frame, and that's really great if you're doing grafting and you want to time your egg laying so that you can pull out your larvae. But it's also useful for Varroa management. What I'm actually in some ways more excited about are these, which are the double deep frames. Because what this allows you to do is do a more complicated manipulation of the brood break that you're creating with that queen. If you start her with one frame of brood comb, drawn comb, and then another frame of capped honey, she's laying on one, and the other one's just sort of a dummy. It's just filling space. Well, if you put her there for a week, then you're going to have some mites emerging outside. The new brood is going to be inside. They're going to start, you know, heading towards it to infest it to colonize that limited brood. Well, if I go in after a week and I take out the honey frame and put in another brood frame, now I've got, the queen has a whole new area in which to lay, so she's probably filled up the one in a week, but she'll go to the next one. Now I've got two different age cohorts of brood, which are going to continue vacuuming up mites from outside as more and more of that capped brood emerges. On day 14, after about 2 weeks, I can pull the queen out, let her start running around in the rest of the colony, filling up the old brood nest. But by day 21, let's say, 3 weeks into this process, all of the eggs that she had previously laid have already grown up, hatched out, matured. All of their mites are out on the bees. or have already run into the very limited brood that's just getting capped inside of these frames. So she's outside, she's refilled the brood nest. I've got these 2 frames of brood in here, which I can take and throw in a freezer or feed to my chickens. And then you do have chickens, don't you, Fred? Yes. And so then what we wind up with is we've essentially vacuumed up 2 frames worth of Varroa mites that have been carefully timed to strategically offer that brood resource right when the mites are looking for somewhere to go. And I can hit that colony with something like an OA RTU dribble or really any miticide, and the remaining mites are now exposed. There's nowhere for them to run and hide. So it's a really cool method. If the single cage, queen in for 2 weeks out, and then you pop the thing in the freezer on day 21 is already a little too complicated, this might be a little bit too much. But for those that are willing to be thoughtful, methodical beekeepers, I think that this in some ways presents a more exciting opportunity.
Okay. How about queen isolation or the introduction cages? Is that just low demand because there aren't a lot of people installing a new queen?
They're doing well, and they work extremely well. The way I talk about those is they're basically like the Cadillac of queen installing. I can get a wire mesh push-in cage, and I can crush a rectangle of comb, and I can put the queen in. It'll do as well, or comparably at least. But if I don't want to mess up my comb, and I don't want to mess with all of that, and I just want to put that queen into a frame, I've shaken all the bees off. I've got new emerging baby bees who will be happy to accept her. Right. It's just the easiest way to do it. And you can come in, she'll fill that up with eggs. She'll fill that whole frame with eggs. And so there's plenty
kind of assess the queen that way too.
Exactly, right. You can go at the same time she's getting released. You can say, aha, this is a bad pattern. I'm going to talk to the guy who sold her.
Excellent.
Or you can let her out and say, yeah, I'm happy with this. More power to you. Take over this hive. So they work really well. They're a little pricey. They're not too pricey.
He's checking the frame. He's checking the spacing of your bars there. Are we at 4.2 on those? Do you know what that is?
I don't know. So did you attend Bob Binney's talk on frame spacing and queen excluders? A number of folks really enjoyed that one. So that was I don't want to. Bob only gets his queen excluders from one trusted and reliable source.
And that would be Betterbee.
Well, and it's not us. These are made in Poland by a company called, it's Polish, PureTech Kubiak or something like that. PK, we call them. But the PK cages and the PK excluders are all extremely methodically well made. We've gone over and visited with them, and there's a woman, I think she might actually be a Ukrainian refugee.
John went, right?
Yeah. But this woman went over, that they've hired, sits there, and her job is to take all of these little bars and then slide them into these holes in all of these structural bars. And I've got a video of her doing it. And that if you and I sat down and had a contest to do it, I bet in an hour we could each get somewhere close to an excluder. That woman is sitting here just manufacturing these things all day, every day. It is unbelievably cool. So I am delighted to be able to offer her work and the work of everybody else in the company here.
Probably premature to ask about it. There's that smaller queen cage that mounts under the wooden
that's
frame.
true. Do
you have those? You're just thinking
Well, we have 2 of them, and we are working with them, conducting some research, making sure that they meet our needs and that they perform the way we want. The last thing I want to do is offer a cage, and then if someone asks me a question, and I think that's a good question, but I haven't actually done it enough to know. So we are currently in that testing phase. If somebody really, really wanted to get one, they could reach out to Betterbee, and we can always get prototypes, but understand that that's going to be a prototype. You're testing it along with us, and we'll share our results. But those are not yet ready for the catalog, because the last thing I want is a product that I regret having offered to somebody.
Okay. Well, you know what? I want to thank you for your time.
It has been a pleasure.
And for always being a reliable source, information and materially for beekeepers.
Absolutely.
Great job all the way around. Thanks.